When my daughter first told me she had fallen in love with a man from her office, I smiled the way mothers do, softly, carefully, hiding the thousand questions that rise behind the eyes. She described him as hard-working, humble, a little stubborn, but kind in a way that made her feel safe. That last part mattered the most to me. His name was Hassan. I had heard the name before, of course. Not from her, but from quarterly reports, performance summaries, and the occasional boardroom mention. He worked in one of the mid-level departments of the company I had built from the ground up over 25 years. A company no one outside the business world associated with me anymore, because I preferred it that way. To most people, I was just Mrs. Rahman, a quiet widow who lived in a modest house, kept a small garden, and visited her daughter often. No one saw the contracts I signed, the decisions I made, or the weight I carried. Not even my own daughter. Especially not my son-in-law. When she told me she wanted me to meet him, I agreed without hesitation. I remember that evening vividly, the way he stood when I entered the room, nervous but respectful, his hands slightly trembling as he greeted me. His eyes were honest. That was the first thing I noticed. He didn't know who I was. And I didn't tell him. It wasn't out of fear or pride. It was something quieter than that. I wanted to know who he really was when no one was watching, when no power or status stood between us. They got married a year later. It was a simple ceremony, just the way my daughter wanted. I sat among the guests like any other mother, watching her smile, watching him promise to take care of her. I believed him. Life settled into a gentle rhythm after that. They lived in a small apartment not far from my house. Hassan continued his job at the company, often coming home late, sometimes exhausted, but always trying his best to be present for my daughter. I watched from a distance. Sometimes, I would ask him casually about work. He would speak freely, unaware that every detail he shared painted a clearer picture for me. "The CEO is very strict," he once said with a faint laugh. "No one has ever seen her in person. All decisions come from the top, but it's like she's invisible." I smiled, stirring my tea. "Do you think she's unfair?" He shook his head. "No. Actually. I think she's fair. Tough, but fair. The company treats employees better than most. I just wish. I don't know. Sometimes it feels like we're just numbers." That stayed with me. The next week, I approved a new employee wellness program. Not because of him alone, but because his words reminded me of something I had almost forgotten, that behind every report was a person trying to be seen. Months passed. I continued to observe him, not as a CEO, but as a mother. I saw how he would wake up early to make breakfast when my daughter was tired. How he saved money carefully, planning for a future that wasn't easy yet. How he never complained about his struggles in front of her. But I also saw the cracks. The pressure at work began to weigh on him. Promotions came and went, and his name was never on the list. Not because he wasn't capable, but because the system didn't always recognize quiet dedication. One evening, he came over for dinner. He looked more tired than usual, his smile thinner. After the meal, as my daughter cleared the table, he sat with me in the living room. "Auntie," he said, hesitating. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever feel like, no matter how hard you work, it's never enough?" I looked at him carefully. "Why do you ask?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've been trying for years. I give everything to my job. But it feels like I'm invisible there. Like I don't matter." His words echoed something deep within me. For a moment, I wanted to tell him everything. To say, "You matter more than you know. I see you. I've always seen you." But I didn't. Instead, I said gently, "Sometimes, the world doesn't recognize good people immediately. But that doesn't make your effort any less valuable. He nodded, though I could tell it didn't fully comfort him. That night, I made a decision. The next board meeting was different. When Hassan's department came up for review, I didn't just glance at the summary. I went through his work in detail, every project, every report, every note from his supervisors. What I found was exactly what I had seen at home. Consistency, integrity, and quiet leadership. He wasn't loud. He didn't demand attention. But he held his team together in ways that numbers couldn't capture. I approved his promotion. Not because he was my son-in-law, but because he had earned it long before I intervened. When the announcement was made, I heard about it the same way he did, from a formal email sent to all employees. That evening, he arrived at my house, eyes shining in a way I had never seen before. "Auntie," he said, almost breathless. "I got promoted." I smiled warmly. "That's wonderful news." "I don't even know how it happened," he admitted. "It just came out of nowhere." I looked at him for a moment. Maybe someone finally noticed. He laughed, a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Maybe." My daughter hugged him tightly, her happiness spilling over into the room. Watching them, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Not the pride of a CEO, but the contentment of a mother who had helped without taking anything away from his dignity. Years passed, and Hassan continued to grow within the company. With each step, he became more confident, more assured of his place in the world. But I never told him. Not when he bought their first house. Not when they welcomed their first child. Not even when he stood in front of me one day, thanking me for always believing in him. "You've been like a guide to me," he said sincerely. "I don't know what I would have done without your advice." I smiled, my heart full. "You would have found your way." And I meant it. Because the truth was, he didn't need my position to succeed. He only needed someone to see him, to remind him that his efforts mattered. One evening, years later, he came home unusually quiet. My daughter told me he had been invited to a special meeting with the top executives of the company. "They're finally going to introduce the CEO," she said excitedly. "Can you believe it?" I felt a stillness settle over me. The moment I had avoided for so long was finally here. The next day, I walked into the boardroom not as Mrs. Rahman, but as the person I had always been in that space. When Hassan entered and saw me sitting at the head of the table, time seemed to stop. The confusion on his face turned into shock, then realization. "You," he whispered. I met his gaze calmly. "Yes." The room was silent. "I didn't know," he said, his voice unsteady. "I know," I replied gently. "Why didn't you tell me?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Because I wanted to know who you were without my name standing behind you. And because I wanted you to earn everything on your own." He stood there for a long moment, processing everything. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I understand," he said quietly. And in his eyes, I saw something I had hoped for all along, not resentment, not doubt, but respect. Not for the CEO. But for the choice I had made as a mother.